All right. Well, welcome back to Change Agent Leadership. And today I'm joined by Jenni Catron, leadership coach, speaker, and founder of the Foresight Group. She's also the author of Culture Matters, a framework for helping your team grow, thrive, and be unstoppable. Today, we're diving into what does it really take to build an intentional, life-giving culture, one that doesn't just sound good. We all hear the word culture and we're like, yeah, what does it actually mean? But how does it actually work? And so I'm excited to have Jenni with me today to unpack her book and to talk about that. So welcome, Jenni.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this topic. I appreciate your book. I've read it
Thank you.
personally, and I'm going through it with my team as well. But before we jump into the book, just real quick, or as long as you want to take, I'd love to hear your own journey. Like, what inspired you to, or what got you to this point to write Culture
Mm,
Matters?
yeah. Honestly, I sometimes joke that I kind of accidentally became the leadership and culture girl.
Okay.
My first career out of college was in the music business in Nashville. I worked at a record company. It was like my dream job. I thought I'd always do it. And what I discovered I actually loved was leading others,
Mm.
leading the team, building great teams to actually achieve the goals. And so I always say I accidentally stumbled into leadership and culture, but it became the passion point for me. And the irony of the story is that in my early days, I'm still am a very driven firstborn A-type overachiever that is like fixated on the goal. And I was a bulldozer. Like the early version of me, and I'm sure at times still, is very much when I get fixated on the goal that I want to achieve, I can miss the people around me. And I had a leader who said to me, Jenni, if you want to work with people, you've got to learn to love them, to lead them. And that was the catalytic moment for me of the recognition that people are the point, that our leadership, the environments we create, the cultures we create, you know, the people are so critical to the work that we're doing. If we're not leading the people well, it becomes really challenging to actually achieve the missions that we're a part of. And so those early experiences were really formative for me and them particularly related to culture. I went through a corporate merger at the record company, and my experience with that organization went from amazing to awful seemingly overnight.
Wow.
And it was because they merged one division with another division, and my team and my leaders changed, and they weren't bad people, but the culture was radically different. And I remember at that moment realizing that the environment a leader creates has a significant impact on an employee's engagement. And so that was kind of that first memorable moment of, wow, I'm still doing the exact same job, but I'm now doing it with a different team, a different leader, a different environment, and my engagement was completely different. And so that just set me on this journey of saying, what do leaders need to do to create environments that great people want to be a part of?
No, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I think everybody at some point can relate to your story in a sense of they've been part
Sure.
of a culture that shifted. Now, not everybody can relate to they've been at a good culture. Unfortunately, I've worked with people and they're like, I've actually never experienced what you're talking about, which is sad, but
It's super
it
sad.
is interesting when it's dramatic. And I really appreciate through your book how you talk about the different steps and processes. So you talked about you were at a record company, you saw a culture that was different. And there's different tensions there that happen. I think a lot of leaders assume culture just happens, right? In other words,
Mm,
the environment just grows. If we put new furniture in, the culture is going to get better or whatever. But you write that culture is either created or design. It's designed. It just doesn't happen by default. So could you unpack what does that look like for you, and how have you seen that lived out? Because it's not doesn't just show up one day. Mr. and Mrs.
right.
Culture doesn't walk in the door.
That's right, that's right. The reality is you have a culture whether you've acknowledged it or not, right? Like, there is an experience and you feel it as a leader, but what the rest of your team feels may or may not be the same depending on the different circumstances. But there's a culture that you have. It's just a matter of, is it the culture you want? And what often happens for leaders is especially like if you're a small team, you're the founding leader, you just expect it to be caught. You just expect the things that matter to you will be, the team will naturally get and they'll understand. And that generally is true for about 5 employees. So if you've got a small team, everybody's with each other all day long, every day, they're intuiting who we are and how we work together. That's my definition of culture, who we are and how we work together. So they have close enough proximity to that leader to pick it up or to get it, or they self-select or they get exited pretty quickly when they aren't a natural culture fit. So that's fine for a handful of people if you can count on everybody just kind of getting it and catching it. But the reality is, rarely do our teams stay that small. And as we grow, you still expect everybody to catch it. But in fact, they're a part of different teams. They don't have the same level of proximity. And so we have to get really intentional as leaders to define what is that culture we aspire to. One of my favorite ways to frame this is to say, what do we look like at our best, right? Like, what do we look like at our best? What are those things that define when our team is operating in a healthy way and helping us achieve the mission? And so, a lot of times we think culture is, the fun perks and the ping pong tables and the free pizza, when in actuality, that stuff is like trivial. That stuff is not core to culture. What's core to culture is how we show up, how we treat each other, how we make decisions, um, uh, the expectations of what are our values and how are we living into the values that we've defined? Are we staying congruent with the mission? And do we have clarity around how we all contribute to working together? And so culture really requires us to be as intentional with it as we are about our mission and our strategy.
No, I really appreciate that. And I actually had a client mention the other day, asked me a question, said, "So, Jonathan, I'm looking at a new job. Would it be normal for me to negotiate PTO versus salary?" And I thought of you in your
Mm,
book, actually, culture, because I was like, well, wait, you're looking for a culture that you do need money to live, but actually you don't want more money. You actually want more time off, your time in
yeah.
your life, which is the culture. And again, what is the company culture and things like that. So it's just interesting
Yep.
how it lives out in different ways and different people in their life cycles as well as they're moving through their career. Just I guess before we get into the book, one last kind of thing to touch on, like for you, was there a particular tension or a moment? You've been doing this a while with the Foresight Group. It's your company. You've been helping
Hmm.
organizations for a long time. Writing a book is a big deal. So was there a tension or I mean, maybe for you, you did it in a weekend, but I'm guessing you did it. Um, is there a moment or a tension or there, oh, wow, I need to get this out? Like, what was that point that you realized culture just isn't a
Mm,
side issue? This is kind of the main thing here.
is Yeah, I think it goes back because in many ways, people ask me the question, Jenny, how long did it take you to write the book? And I'm like, 20 years.
Yeah,
Um,
fair.
because, it really has been a reflection of my own journey to figure out how do you intentionally build culture and not
Mm,
just leave it to chance. And I would say the tension point or that key moment for me was, I had gone through that corporate merger at the record company, had those two very distinct experiences of culture. And then I moved from there into an executive director role at a local church, very large church in Nashville, Tennessee, where I lived. And I was one of the first, like there were less than 10 employees, and I was taking on the leadership of the entire staff. So I was coming in kind of as number two in the organization. And I remember thinking that the organization was really young at that point, but it was growing rapidly. And so I could kind of see what was on the horizon of like, yes, it feels awesome right now because they're young,
yeah.
scrappy, everybody's in it together, but they are on a rocket ride of growth. And if we're not intentional about our culture, it's going to derail
Mm,
really quickly. And again, this is just me reflecting on
yeah.
had just had those two stark experiences at the record company. So I came into that seat at that church and I thought, I now sit in a place where I have disproportionate influence on the culture. Now, I believe everybody on a team influences culture. We're all contributing to it. But senior leaders have disproportionate influence just because of our role and responsibility. And that was the moment for me, Jonathan, where I was like, okay, I like I could mess this up. Like
Sure.
I am now sitting in this seat and have this responsibility, and I need a plan. I need to be intentional with culture. And so that was really the moment, and I would say everything that I wrote in Culture Matters was a lot of experimentation in those early days of trying to figure out, how to be intentional
Mm.
with culture. And then over the years, it really evolved into the framework that I
Yeah.
created. But it was that moment, it was that sense of, "Ooh, I'm responsible. It's up to me. Like, and what am I gonna do with this?" And so again, felt a little weighty, but I also am really proud of what it produced.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. It again, I appreciate the book, and to me it was obvious that this was not a weekend endeavor. This has been years of, I think, trial and error, probably. I know I've grown as a leader from trial
Yeah.
and error.
Yes.
Unfortunately, people have been my guinea pigs, so to speak. But together we've learned, and so I really appreciate that. So let's dive into the book a little bit. I mean, you talk about you use your 5 phase framework for building culture, which is access, define, build, equip, and commit. So we're not going to dive deep into each one because people need to read the
Sure.
book, and we're not here for 20 hours either. So for the first one is assess. You talk about assessing, which is very important. As
Yeah.
leaders are listening to this podcast, people need to assess things first. So how can leaders get an honest read on their current culture without putting people at edge or like thinking we're going
Mhm.
to go way over here just because I feel like it. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, and I love that you called this out. We have to know where we are in order to define where we wanna
Mm,
go. And so that's why we start with the assess phase of, like, you need an honest reflection of what's true in your culture right now. And I always coach leaders, like, this is a bit of a vulnerable first step
mm,
too. So, like any leader who does the
yeah.
work, I'm like, "I'm so proud of you," because starting here takes some vulnerability. It takes some humility to say, "Gosh, I really hope it's great, but I'm willing to
Mm,
find out because there's no perfect culture, right? Bunch of messy humans trying to do good work together. So there's no perfect culture, but a great leader is willing to say, I need to know what's true. So I encourage leaders, do a full assessment with your staff, like a full survey with your staff. We have tools for that I recommend. I'm sure a lot of leaders have resources for that. But part of the key to this, Jonathan, is that it's a lot about our posture as leaders. Are we demonstrating that we want to hear the truth?
mm,
Because I've also had scenarios where a leader or an organization will facilitate a survey, but it's very clear that they don't actually want to hear the bad news, right? Like, and
yep.
so if that's already in your culture, then you're
Mm,
probably going to get a very benign response in your survey that's not giving you good data on what's true. So the best thing a leader can do is assess their culture, whether it be a survey, focus groups, there's different mechanisms for that. But come to that with an attitude of, hey, I know it's not perfect, and I really want us to be a thriving and healthy team. So I invite you to be honest about, the questions, the discussion, so that we have a good understanding of what's true, so we can live into the best parts of who we are. And, if you open a map or you open, your maps on your phone and the blue dot isn't working, like, you can't map the route
mm.
to wherever you wanna go if you don't actually know where you are. And so but I would say great tools to help you get the information, but the posture of the leader is really critical in order to ensure that team members actually give you good information.
I appreciate that. I think what I heard you is it takes humility, to want
Yeah.
to admit
Yeah.
that we care about the culture, and it's not how we get there or what exactly it is, but we need to find out where we are as a as a starting point versus where I think we should be. And I think I'll
That's
just
right.
highlight in this, we'll touch on the end, we'll put your information at the end for the foresight group. But I think it's important sometimes it's people to realize many times you're so busy, you're just not qualified to do it yourself. And you need a third party to come in and help you
That's right.
just to be objective and to be able to take the data in. So people are maybe more safe to actually say,
Yeah. Yes.
Jonathan, I really like you. However, you're doing these
Yeah.
things, you might be more open to talk to a group like yours versus sharing that I'm going to be the first one to see it. So I appreciate the assess
Yeah.
stage. Yeah. Well, your second one is define. You've moved from assess to define. You talk about translating values from words on a wall. I think we have all seen words on a wall in
Hmm.
businesses. People actually walk by them and don't even know what they mean many times. But we want to transfer
Right.
those
Yeah.
from words on a wall to behaviors people can live out. So just kind of high level, what does that process look like of taking it from live your life to the best on the wall to what does that actually mean? How do I actually live that out? So
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So good. And this is really key. There are a number of different ways to define your culture, but values are kind of that
Mm.
anchor point. And a lot of organizations have done some exercise in values. And like you said, it's like, yeah, we did that day with a
Yeah.
consultant. We came up with some values, we put them on the lobby wall, and nobody really knows what they mean. And so a lot of times when I recommend doing the values work, I get a little bit of eye rolls because leaders are like, we've done that. Everybody kind of makes fun of them. But I push and say, "Hey, I want you to do some more work on this because there are values that are driving how your team works together, even if they're not the ones that are on the wall. There are ways that you work, and there might be great values and there might be some not so great values, right?" And so what I mean by that is if I were to come to your organization and I get to the meeting and I'm there 5 minutes ahead, but nobody else shows up until 5 minutes later, that tells me that you don't actually value punctuality. Well, that might be fine. That might be a value you're not terribly concerned about, but it is telling me how you behave, right? It is telling me like the habits that have become behaviors in your organization. So, what I encourage leaders to do is like do some values work and really, really distill the things that are really, really important to you. So, for example, at Foresight, a key value for us is self leadership because our conviction is if we're not leading ourselves well, how in the world can we coach other leaders in other organizations? Like, if we're not doing our work in growing and learning and continuing to get better, we can't, with integrity, coach and develop other leaders. So that's a deep value. Like, if you don't align with that, you won't last at Foresight, right? Like, that's really, really core. So that's what I encourage leaders to do is like really distill and don't go grab the handful of, excellence, integrity, like, typical words. Go dig for the stuff that's really true, the stuff that like makes you frustrated or, keeps you up at night because it's really important to you. So come up with those values, but then I want you to take it a step further. And there's a tool in the book called the values grid, where I say, define the value. What is that value? Why does it matter? What's the belief behind that value? Like, what's the conviction that is like, makes you go, this has to be one of them? And then what are the behaviors? What does it look like in action?
Mm.
So give me, because, I may have a value of punctuality or let's say responsiveness. And my idea of responsiveness is that you'll respond to an email within 24 hours. But another team member can go, well, you get to email when you get to email, right? Like they're going to respond, but they have no urgency in their responsiveness. So every one of us brings different interpretations to those words when we hear them. So going a level deeper and saying, what does that look like? Give 3 like behaviors that help me understand this is what you mean by that value of responsiveness. And then the last piece of the grid is we say, okay, now let's find some fun language, a sticky statement or a story that reinforces that value. So, like in the value of self leadership for Foresight, our sticky statement is lead yourself well to lead others better. And we say that phrase over and over. We talk about it all the time. We share stories with each other, but you find language that makes that value a little more personal to your team. And what I find is that when organizations and when leaders take the time to do that work, and it takes time, like it will take several months to kind of distill those values and work through each part of that grid, but it brings it to life. It's like, I can't tell you the number of clients I've worked with, Jonathan, that have done this work. And they're like, oh my gosh, by going to that level of detail on our values, our team gets it now. Like we have language, we have understanding, and all of a sudden, it's starting to guide our interactions rather than just be this thing that sits on the wall in our
Yeah.
organization.
Wow, that is so good. Thank you. I think I'm just going to throw a question out for people as they're watching this to pause and think, you said a statement which hit me. It's hit me before. You said, I don't remember exactly what your phrase was, but you said, if you don't believe or live this out, you're not going to last here. I've heard
Hmm.
that at a couple places that I've talked to people and I've asked them, tell me about who you are. Like, tell me about your culture. And I'm just curious, as people are watching us, just think about that, where you work now or where you're leading as a leader. If you were to ask your people, what defines how you're going to survive and thrive here? Do people even know? And just think
Mm,
about that. And if you don't, this is a great place to start, is to read this book and to dive into that, because I think that's important for us all to know what is the key thing that allows people to thrive in the culture. So I think that's
that's really
great.
good.
Yeah. Well, you got me thinking, but I got to move on. So, build is the next one. Culture gets built in systems, not slogans.
Mm,
I love slogans, but they only go so far. So you
right?
talk about this in the book. You actually, one thing I appreciate about your book is you give lots of tools. So I think you did a good job.
Mm,
I've read several books on culture that are just high level, like, we should all just love each other and get along and give free food out.
right.
And those are non-helpful. And then I've read others that are just so textbook. It's like, well, if you do this, it has to equal this, and that's not always true either. I appreciate you did. I felt you had a good
Yeah.
balance. So this you
Thanks.
specifically build into that about structures and rhythms. You mentioned in the last part you had a values grid, which we went through with our team, or I'm starting to go through. So, what
Hmm.
structures or rhythms make culture tangible? What just thoughts for leaders
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the aha for me. And I think
Mm,
it's the thing that sometimes catches leaders like kind of off guard is like, but you're building a system to support culture. Isn't
yeah,
culture
yeah.
relationships and how we feel and that warm, fuzzy stuff? And it's like, yes, and it actually needs a
Mm,
system to help reinforce it, right? If we're
mm,
going to define who we are and how we work together, what we look like at our best, we need to know how we're purposefully reinforcing that in the culture. So, one of the other tools in the book is called the employee journey grid. I'm really fancy with grids, right? Like nothing fancy,
yeah,
but functional is the goal.
right.
But the employee journey grid and what I'm looking for, because then a lot of times leaders will be like, oh gosh, another system. We've got so many systems. Well, what I'm looking for with your culture operating system is I want you to actually just layer it into the things you're already doing. So in the employee journey grid, I say, okay, I want you to look at just those key moments in an employee's journey with the organization, from interviewing and hiring to onboarding to your meeting rhythms and like staff events to your performance plans and reviews and to even how people exit the organization. Where can you reinforce your culture, your defined culture at all of those key spots? So the starting point is, we just talked about defining your values, and your values become kind of that anchor for the clarity of your culture. And looking at how are those things showing up in each of those key points of an employee's journey with the organization. So letting the values you've defined influence your interviewing questions, right? So as you're interviewing people, you're asking questions related to your values so you can get a sense of, do they have an alignment with that value? Are they going to be a good fit here because they already have a high responsiveness, or they already lead themselves well? I'm asking some questions and I'm drawing some things out. So being purposeful to say, hey, at the very beginning, I want to give them an opportunity to understand this is who we are, this is how we work together, and I'm interviewing for alignment around that. Then they come on staff and you're saying in the onboarding process, how am I bringing them up to speed on everything we defined in that values grid? So those beliefs, those behaviors, those stories and language, like bring new employees up to speed on all of those things. Then in my staff meetings, where am I reinforcing the values? Am I teaching them out? Am I celebrating when people live them out? And finding ways to reinforce those things. Performance reviews. I recommend part of your performance process is a check-in on their alignment with the values. Are they modeling and living out the values? And if they're not, giving some coaching around that. And then finally, even when people exit the organization, how you handle exits influences how the rest of the staff perceive your culture, right?
Yeah.
If and you can't share every detail around why an employee leaves, but you can certainly have a process for that employees can trust that if somebody exits, there's a consistency in how we handle these things that's aligned with our values. And so I gave you a lot to think about in a very, hopefully condensed description. But you want to look at all of those just rhythms of your organization and say, where can I build in particularly our values, but the culture we aspire to? So it's just showing up regularly, and it's not, oh crap, oh wait, we didn't talk about culture, and 6 months goes by and you decide to do a staff fun day or something, right? It's like you're just building it into your rhythm, so it's just you're continuing to reinforce it in all those key moments.
Oh, thank you. That is a lot. However, you did a good job breaking it down. And I think it just hit me towards the end. This is called build, right? Build a culture.
Yeah,
Building
yeah,
anything is not fast if it's going to last. It
that's
really,
right.
I mean, I didn't mean that to rhyme, but it just doesn't,
It worked
it
well though.
doesn't work because it does take effort. And I think that is part of leaders. We want things now. All of us do. We want things
That's right.
now, but
Yeah,
we can start it now, but we have to I think what I heard from you is it takes reinforcement on a continual basis at all levels with buy-in, because if things are going to hit the fan, every place it
yeah,
happens, it's
yep,
life. Humans are involved. And
yep,
so we can help it go better if there's a bit of trust, because people know, well, I don't know what happened, like you said. However, if we lived our values out, I know that
that's
the
right.
best things possible were done, and then the results happened. And so, yeah, you can talk
That's
about
right.
that. So, yeah, building takes time.
Yeah,
Well, tied to that very close is the next one, which is equip. I mean, you talk about develop, resource your team to live out the culture. And I think the phrase here I want to talk about is consistently. You kind of hit on that already. So
yeah.
how do you develop and resource your team consistently? I'm going to add a little curve here, not intentional, but how do you do it consistently that doesn't burn people out, right? Because you want it to be,
Ooh, that's good.
I'm thinking, yeah, I want it to be in all those things you mentioned. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it should be in your handbook, but it also should be in your
Hmm.
onboarding and this and any offboarding and other things. But how do you talk about it so that it is talked about in a positive way, but it isn't like, oh, here we go again.
Again,
So
yes, yeah,
thoughts on that?
yep,
I'm sure you've had no pushback,
yeah.
but I'm just thoughts. Yeah.
That's so good. No, and that's real, right? Because it's like all of a sudden it can become routine and mundane if we're not careful
Yeah.
with it, right? And so I think that's where, as a leader, we've got to be, there's still an intuition and discernment
Yeah.
that comes
Good.
with leadership that you still have to apply even in this of like, you know what, hey, we've been doing values this way in our staff meetings for a year. We need to reinvent it.
Yeah.
We need to think differently about it. What's a new way or a new approach to, and so, and you've read this in the book, Jonathan, but I encourage people, build a culture team.
Yep.
So you don't have to be the only one thinking about this and working on it. Build a team of people from throughout the organization who just kind of have an extra get it factor and
Yeah.
want to contribute positively. And they are a great resource for saying, hey, the way we've been doing that is getting a little stale. Can we do that differently? So utilize and lean into people, and don't be afraid to freshen it up or change it. Just don't quit on it. And like you said earlier, the building takes time. One of the phrases I tell leaders all the time is patience and persistence. And this is, again, like you said, it is the antithesis of what we want to do as leaders. We want things now. We want to move fast. But culture is a slow build. It is patience and persistence. And so the equip phase, the other thing I will say about that is your leaders at every level. So if you have other team members who are managing staff, making sure that they are well equipped to reinforce culture in their one-on-ones with team members, or in just those micro coaching moments that happen, in real time in the middle of a project or in the middle of a meeting, where your leaders are looking for where they can reinforce the culture. Hey guys, y'all showed up today on time. Thank you for representing our value of, punctuality, and thank you all for responding so quickly to blah, blah, blah. So that leaders are looking for those places to just positively reinforce very antidotally. Like that, it's like it's not scripted. It's just they're on the lookout and they're coaching for what we want repeated in the organization. So the one, and this is, and I'll just take a quick minute here, Jonathan, and then I know we need to move on, but the equip phase of making sure leaders at every level are reinforcing culture is where I'm seeing the greatest breakdown in the culture work that I'm doing. Part of it is that we have a lot of young managers in management positions, which I think always happens, but I think we're particularly in a place where a lot of people got promoted into management, and um, organizations are moving so fast that a lot of time we're not giving good coaching and development for people to have the skills to manage others. And that's putting extraordinary pressure on those individuals. And some of them are opting out and going, I don't want to manage people. Just put me back in an individual contributor role. And or what we know from Gallup's research for decades is that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And so if our people managers aren't well equipped to reinforce the culture, that becomes a big breakdown in the culture. So that equip phase has a lot of layers to it, and making sure that our leaders at every level are ready to help support it is really key.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I think you hit on a key. I was going to ask you actually, what's the weakest phase? I was like, should I ask that question? You asked, you answered it, or not weakest, but in
Yeah.
where do people tend to get hung up? You
Yeah.
also, it kind of brought to mind, I'm just throwing this out. It seems, when you want to build culture, it's a lot of work on the front end. It's a lot of heavy
Yeah.
lifting, is like, where are we? Where do we want to go? But once you get through the stages and you start to get to the build stage, and then you equip, and then when you get to the last one, which is commit, it seems it doesn't go on autopilot, but you actually have other people then, not just the leadership pushing it out, but you actually have people living it and
That's
are your
right.
cheerleaders together, versus when new people come and you're telling them, hey, well, here's our culture. Actually, other people are telling the culture. And I think that's a part leaders
Yeah.
miss, is you're paying forward on this one, I feel, if you have
That's
a
right.
good culture.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. You get that flywheel effect
Mhm.
of, it feels really hard to get it moving, but
Yeah.
then once you do, and then leaders at every level are reinforcing it, then it's kind of taking on a life of its
Yes,
own in a healthy way,
it
right?
is.
Then you're just managing that momentum rather than trying to build it.
Yeah.
So I love that you called that out. That's great.
Yeah. So the last part is commit. So culture is never finished. Well, I think it's never finished because it always changes. I think that, or tweaks a little
That's
bit.
right.
I mean, you can write it and you can't just pull it back out in 10 years. So what, from your perspective, what does commitment look like over the long haul, like an organization? So like you
Hmm.
mentioned, you might have a new leader who they're on the
Hmm.
verge of like, okay, I'm having influence here, but I'm kind of like, wow, what's going on? So what does it look like, commitment to them over the long haul, to stay committed, but also encouraged? What thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So in the design of the whole framework is more of like this flywheel,
Mm,
like look, in that it's like, hey, you do the assess, define, build, equip, and then you commit and you do it again. And so finding your rhythm of, hey, once, and I recommend about once a year, do a full staff survey and assessment to just go, okay, what's true now?
mm,
Now the beauty of that is, as you do the work every year, hopefully you're seeing improvement,
mm,
and or you're getting new data points of like, oh, something shifted. We changed a leader over in this department, and there's a positive or a
yeah,
negative impact on that. Or we had something external create some problems, and we felt that in the
mm,
team this year. And so just that regular rhythm of, hey, let's get an assessment of where we
yeah,
are, and then is there anything we need to clarify in the define phase? I was working with a team a couple weeks ago, and they've done about 18 months.
okay,
They've been working on their framework. And so we did their second survey. And in the survey, they noticed that a key priority for the organization had been showing up in survey one, didn't show up at all in survey
mm,
two. And they were like, wait a minute, this is still a key
yeah,
initiative for our organization, but the team isn't talking about it. And the team wasn't talking about it because it had kind of fallen out of like core
mm,
communication from the senior leaders.
okay,
And they were like, oh, we got to circle back and we've got to define this because this is core to who we are. So, doing the process again helped them go, oh, there's something we need to
mm,
define. We need to bring a little more clarity to. So we're going to build that back in. And then we're going to make
yeah,
sure our leaders are reinforcing it, and we're going to keep doing it again. And so what's actually fun about it for me is that I think as leaders start to understand the value of working the process and like that ongoing commitment to culture, they realize they just keep getting better intel that keeps making them smarter and their team better. And so again, if you have a culture team that's helping you, they're going to help you with fresh ideas. There will be points that you recognize, you know what, we had a major shift in our strategy or our vision. And actually, there's some things we need to tweak in our values. Now, I don't recommend doing that every year, but usually about every 7 to 10 years, it's time for a values refresh. So there's lots of things that show up, but kind of becomes a fun discovery. Maybe it's just because I'm biased and I love this work,
Maybe.
but when you keep working it, you get to celebrate the improvements. So that commitment to it, you see year over year the progress that you've made, and then you also see the places where you're like, we just a couple tweaks, a couple refinements, and we're getting even better.
No, I really appreciate that. And well, you made me think. I love podcasts because I love interviewing people because I get to learn and grow through it. And so you got me thinking. I'm like, okay, I do annual reviews on people, but kind of your annual check-in, if I'm hearing you correctly, for culture is it's kind of like an annual review for your organization for culture. You're doing the same thing. And
Totally,
if you don't ask the
totally.
questions, like if I don't do an annual review on an employee, I have no idea what they're thinking. I mean, I have ideas, but I don't really know. And we're not having that
That's
dialogue.
right.
It's not we're not setting time aside to actually talk it through.
Yeah,
Whereas if you do this culture as well on an annual basis, like at the organization you're talking about, you actually get to sit down and say, well, why is it not a big item anymore? What changed? And
that's right.
I've seen, I think it ties into culture as well. It clicked. I know currently with my organization, I think we have a good culture. I believe we do. But however, I notice sometimes that the things that come up or tensions that come up are time delayed, whether it's several people
Mhm.
leaving or there's just something has happened in society. And I notice there's a shift. I'm like, well, what's going on? And people notice, well, so and so left 6 months ago and now we're feeling it, or this happened. And so if you don't do these check-ins, it just kind of goes by the wayside and you
Gives you
kind of,
blind
it's a
spots.
blind spot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I love that in your book you talk also about leadership leakage, where habits
Mm.
spill over into culture in a positive way. What are some of the ways leaders unintentionally shape culture for better or for worse? Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's that awareness of um, what we do still speaks louder than what we
Mm,
say.
yeah.
And so I think leaders just being conscious of that, of like, the how we work part of that definition of culture shows up in just what leaders do. Like people are still taking their cues. Again, I'm a bit firm believer in assess, define, build the
Mhm.
systems, do all the things we've talked about. But if leaders are operating incongruent with those things, they will follow what we do all day long. Like
Mm,
that will be the thing that they actually
yeah.
follow or listen to. And so just that commitment to showing up and reflecting the best of your culture
Mm,
and making sure that you're you're conscious of how what you do is shaping the culture and
mm,
for better or worse,
mhm,
right?
yeah.
Like, and not to put like exorbitant pressure on leaders because we're not going to get it right every day. We're going to have bad days, um but even in those moments, then we come back around to go, you know what, I didn't show up as my best self yesterday. That wasn't in alignment with our values. My
Right.
apologies, you guys. Can you give me grace? And I'm going to show up better today. Like the leader still has to model
Yeah.
it, I guess, is the
Yeah.
bottom line.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. We're going to we're going to leak, period, because we're humans. We
Right.
express things, but we want it to be positive culture. And like you said, what we see. Well, so a new manager or a seasoned leader is listening to this and they're like, wow, this is good. Um, but our culture has cracks because we haven't looked at the
Sure.
foundation for a while. Where should they begin tomorrow
Mm,
or Monday? So, or whatever day this comes out, where would they begin the new week in their life to start their culture travels journey?
yeah. The first thing that I would say very simply is just reflect for a moment and say, what does our culture look like at its best? Like, what's the best of us? and show up committed to just start living into that. Because, what happens is if our culture's not in a great spot, we kind of start to um, maybe get slack on some of our commitments to, well, it just feels impossible, so I'm starting to not show up
Yeah. Yeah.
at my best either, right?
Right.
So I would say the first simple thing is like, hey, just what do we look like at our best, and how can I start reflecting that, even if it feels very um, feels like an outlier right now. But then the second thing I would say is to work on how can I assess this.
Mhm.
So just that commitment to,
Mhm.
you know what, we're going to commit to it. It
Yeah.
matters. It's worth it. It's not overnight, but I'm going to commit to this process. So, and then of course, beginning with the assess
Right.
phase of digging into where can I start getting good understanding, and what this might be, Jonathan, and I'm with you. I think doing a full blown assessment using a third party so you can really get good intel is really helpful. But you as a leader could go in tomorrow to a couple of your key leaders. And I would say, when I say key leaders, not all your exec team. Like, go find a couple of really thoughtful, some of your best contributors, and just say, hey, I'm curious,
Mm.
like, what's it feel like to work here right now? What's the best of our culture? What's the worst of our culture? And you can just get some anecdotal feedback from a couple of key people to give you an idea of where are we now, um, and then of course, start working the process.
Yeah. No, I like that. I think what I heard you say at the end there is so key throughout your entire, as I read your book, which is we need to have a curiosity mindset through all of this. We want to be curious
Yeah.
and like, hey, where are we? What's happening? You also mentioned something. We didn't get here overnight. Wherever a person's culture is, it didn't arrive overnight. It was shaped over years, and
That's
so it
right.
takes time to assess and time to build to dig out, if you will. Might be the wrong phrase there, but I just encourage people as you're listening. If you're like, "Wow, I wish that was true of my culture," you can have an impact. You do have an impact, and it's not overnight. This is no silver bullet,
That's right.
but there is systems in place and people to help, just like Jenni and her team who can help you. Yeah, we're just going to be wrapping up here soon. I think, just a couple at the end for me, I guess I'll throw a little bit of a different question at you. What's one thing leaders often, would you say, struggle with? So, or what do they get wrong when they're trying to change the culture? So what are some, maybe a flag or two just to identify? I know
Mm,
you kind of touched on it, like, be inquisitive as a positive side. What are things,
right.
just a thought on a couple things to maybe avoid um, when when working on changing the culture?
Yeah. Yeah. And you hit on this a little bit, but not assuming it's a episodic thing that, so I'll give you an
Right.
example. I had a organization I was working with, we got back their culture survey, wasn't great, and the senior leader looked at the HR director and said, "Hey, can you go do a training day and address this?" And I was like, "Okay, we got a little work to do."
Yeah.
Because it isn't an overnight fix, and again, you alluded to this. It's that recognition of patience and persistence. So my coaching would be when leaders get impatient and want a quick fix.
Yeah.
Because what that often does is, I can't tell you the number of times where when a culture is not great and the team doesn't feel terribly connected, and then a leader or a exec team will push a like big staff fun day and outing, or you know, um, happy hour after work, and everybody's like, it's just another work thing I have to do. Like, they don't see it as a positive, they just see it as another thing they need to do. So I think being impatient about the process is important. Um, and um, and then I think when we in some way communicate our our frustration or dissatisfaction with the culture. Like, I think sometimes we as leaders, like, we may not say it out loud, but our face might say it. When we lack hope or belief in our team, that can be
It's true.
uh,
Mm,
a challenge
yeah.
to helping us lead the culture.
That's
And we
good.
all have those moments. So I'm like,
No, no.
we
Yeah.
feel it, we
Yeah.
experience it, we wrestle with it, but we've got to figure out how to deal with that behind the scenes, and show up with a
Yeah.
hopeful um uh, positive belief in our team.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think it goes back, you just mentioned a little bit ago, as leaders, we do influence people by our actions. We're being seen, we're being watched. And
Mhm.
so we do have to be careful, but yet we don't want to overreact to that. So I really appreciate your
That's
balance
right.
on that. So thank you for that. And I think also just a reminder that for all leaders that are listening to this, whether you're in management and you're just new to management and you're going to become a leader and you're moving up in whatever, um, for me, as I read your book, Jenni, I think one of the key things, a reminder, you weren't implicit about this, but I think a key is we also need to look at ourselves and say, where am I in this process? And do I need to
That's
get
right.
help personally? And so I just encourage people as you're watching this, as you go through the book, if Jenni and her team can be of help for that as well, to reach out. Because a lot of times senior leaders are like, wow, I need to solve this. And you mentioned this. This is not a one person job. It's a team effort. Um,
That's
and
right.
and if you don't have a team, get help. Or if you don't have a safe team, that's another. I've talked about that in different episodes. You need safe people that you can
Mm.
work with. So there's different stages. So as you're listening to this episode, I hope it's encouraging that there is help out there. You're not on your own. Well, Jenni, I appreciate you being on. Any for you, just how would you like to wrap this up? Your closing thoughts on culture and the Foresight Group.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Jonathan, thanks for having the conversation.
Yeah.
And I hope we haven't overwhelmed all of you listening today,
No.
because here's the beauty of this. And this is what I would love for y'all to hear, is that like leadership is such a gift.
Mm.
Like the privilege of changing and affecting the lives of the people that we're entrusted to lead. Like there is like it is such a sacred work to be able to lead others and help shape their experiences and their growth and their development. And it is so absolutely rewarding to lead a team that is aligned and working well together, because when they are, our ability to accomplish the mission is just exponentially greater. So I hope you hear the vision
Mm.
for this work and the power of it. It is patient and persistent work. Like it isn't an overnight fix, but it is absolutely so worth it and so rewarding, because our lives are too sacred to squander in a place that drains the life out of us, right? Like for every one of us. And so as a leader, if your team is not aligned, you feel that. Like that's a drain. It wears on you. So this work is so meaningful. It's so worth it. Um, but it starts with just even that just commitment to say, you know what, I'm going to lean into this. I'm not going to fix it overnight, but I'm going to lean into it, and I promise you'll start feeling the momentum of it. So um as Jonathan said, our team loves this work. We love to be a resource. And so any way we can serve you, the book unpacks it all. Like it really does give
Yes.
you the framework, but then of course we've got great resources to
Yeah.
support you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, this has been such a valuable conversation for me. I know it will be for our listeners. Thank you for reminding me that culture doesn't happen by accident. It's actually built by design. I appreciate that. And just a couple calls to action. If you're listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, visit Jenni's website. Go to culturemattersbook.com for resources. Also, I'm just going to encourage you to take a moment, reflect. What's one behavior I'm modeling that shapes culture today? Or what do I need to change in my culture? What would that look like? And then commit to getting the book and read it. If this episode challenged or encouraged you, take a few moments to reflect what you want to do and leave a comment. Would love to follow up with you. You can find Jenni's book, I mentioned, Culture Matters, and resources on her website. That'll be in the show notes below. If this episode added value, please hit like and subscribe and share with somebody that can help them add culture value to their life as well. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Hankin, your change agent coach. Keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading change.